This is a Fox News alert. Moments ago, a news conference wrapped up in Florida where a special task force created by Governor Rick Scott is just minutes into its first public meeting on that state's Stand Your Ground laws. The task force was organized after George Zimmerman shot 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida last February and is arguing self-defense. Florida's Stand Your Ground law allows deadly force if you think your life is in danger. Trayvon's parents are also in attendance today and making their voices heard, leading a rally outside the hearing and demanding that the law be repealed.
What this law is saying to us is that it's okay to be a vigilante in our society today. And the public is not going to stand around for it, and we're certainly not going to stand around for it.
Here now to talk about this publicly for the very first time on our air is LaPierre, Executive Vice President and CEO of the National Rifle Association. Welcome to America Live.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, I want to ask you, first of all, this task force now examining things in Florida, getting public input. They're talking with law enforcement officers, prosecutors across the board. Do you think it is helpful to examine possibly changing or modifying, even repealing these laws?
Well, Shannon, you know, I don't know the facts on this whole Zimmerman-Trayvon Martin case, and I've learned to hold my tongue until I do. But let me tell you what I do know the facts on, and that's the Florida law. And there's a shocking ignorance of the law, what it says in Florida, or it's being done for political purposes to seek political advantage. All that law says in Florida is if you're in your home and your glass breaks in the middle of the night, there is a presumption that person is there to cause you imminent fear of death or bodily harm. If you're in your car and someone assaults you and tries to pull you out, there is a presumption that person's there to cause you imminent fear of death or bodily harm. If you are on the street in Florida, it's a completely different section of the law. It's 776012 as opposed to 776013. And if you're on the street in Florida, what the law says is if someone assaults you or you're attacked, you can meet force with force. The law even says not deadly in parentheses. The only way, if you're on the street in Florida, that you can use deadly force, and this is no different than the law in virtually every other state in the country, in fact, it's completely unremarkable, is if you have a reasonable fear to believe you are in imminent fear of death or severe bodily harm. But there's absolutely no presumption at all that that's the case. So what you have if you're on the street in Florida is simply an excessive force situation. Did the person, given the circumstances, use excessive force or not? That's an issue of fact. It's an issue of finding out the facts are, and that's what juries are for. But gosh, there's been so much distortion as to what this law says, with shoot first and everything else, completely misinforming the American public.
Do you think it's purposeful or do you think it's accidental, the misinformation?
You know, I think a lot of it is by some of these politicians that want to impose a duty to retreat on the American public, where if your glass breaks in the middle of the night and there's some criminal coming into your house, they want to impose a duty to retreat on the crime victim with a long, complicated checklist, rather than do what's natural at the most terrifying moment of that person's life when they're in a state of overwhelming reactive panic, which is to protect your life and your family from those that would destroy it. And they want to impose that duty to retreat all over the country. It's mainly politicians and newspapers. You see the New York Times, the Washington Post, a lot of the big networks. They really don't want the American public protecting themselves.
All right,
so they're willing to distort this in order to set their political agenda.
I want to listen a bit to what Trayvon Martin's mother had to say today. Again, this meeting going on in Florida. Let's listen to a bit of that.
Many people do not know how to handle themselves with a gun. And I just want them to take a look at this law. I'm not saying for them to get rid of it, but please amend it. Please review it. This was a child. This was a kid that was shot in the heart.
Does that sound reasonable to you?
You know, it's a tragedy. I mean, our heart goes out to the family. But have you ever been threatened? I mean, you talk to crime victims in the country, and I'm not talking about this case, but you talk to crime victims, it's the most terrifying moment of their life. They really are in a state of overwhelming reactive panic. Instinctively, they'll do anything at that point to save themselves. They've done nothing wrong. They're going about their business, and yet someone is trying to destroy their whole life. And the whole idea that to twist this Florida case into some national movement to try to impose a duty to retreat on the American public at their most terrifying moment of their life, rather than let them protect themselves and save themselves, and then open the crime victim up to civil lawsuits by a criminal that will bankrupt them, is crazy. This duty to retreat may sound fine in an Ivy League cocktail party. It doesn't work very well in the real world of crime victims.
Okay, I want to give you a chance to respond to something that came from the president, Dan Gross, of the Brady Campaign Against Gun Violence in the wake of this particular case. This is what he said. The NRA wants us to be a nation without any gun laws, a nation where just about anybody can get a gun and take it anywhere. Their leaders and spokespeople use fear, paranoia, and misleading notions of self-defense to justify flooding our streets with armed and violent people, and the result is more tragedy like Trayvon's. Your response?
One of the great strengths of America is that law-abiding people in this country can own firearms to protect themselves from violent criminals that ought to be in jail, that too many politicians don't have the courage to enforce the law and put the bad guys in jail and keep them there. I mean, the American public overwhelmingly supports the Second Amendment. We have laws against drug dealers with guns, gangs with guns, felons with guns, all kinds of gun laws, and you have almost no enforcement of the federal laws on the books against the bad guys, and that would really cut crime.
Right. I'm sorry, we've got to leave it there. We're coming up to a hard break, but Wayne LaPierre of the NRA, we thank you, sir, for your time today in discussing this case.
Hey, thanks, Shannon.